Good afternoon, everyone. Today, we're discussing a significant development in the Russia-Ukraine conflict, namely the announcement by former President Donald Trump setting a hard deadline for Ukraine to accept a U.S.-backed peace plan. This announcement has implications not only for Ukraine and Russia, but for NATO, European security, and the broader geopolitical landscape. According to reports, Trump has set November 27, 2025, as the final deadline for Ukraine to formally accept what he has called the 28-point peace plan. The plan, which has been in development with U.S. policymakers, aims to create a comprehensive framework for ending the ongoing conflict between Russia and Ukraine. It is important to note that Ukraine's president, Volodymyr Zelensky, has indicated that he intends to propose alternative solutions rather than accept the plan outright. This sets the stage for a tense diplomatic negotiation, as Trump frames his proposal as a take-it-or-leave-it ultimatum. What makes this announcement particularly significant is its timing and the potential consequences of non-acceptance. By establishing a strict deadline, the U.S. is signaling urgency and attempting to create a sense of pressure on Ukraine. At the same time, this announcement has drawn reactions from multiple international actors, including European leaders and Russian officials. The geopolitical stakes are high, and understanding the nuances of the plan, as well as the responses it has elicited, is critical for investors, policymakers, and global citizens alike. Today's presentation will walk through the details of Trump's plan, including its key provisions, military and economic components, nuclear implications, and the range of international reactions. We will also examine the risks and potential outcomes, and what this could mean for Ukraine, the United States, and the broader international community. By the end of this session, you should have a clear understanding of the stakes, the controversies, and the potential pathways forward as the deadline approaches. Let's begin with the announcement itself. On November 14, 2025, former President Trump publicly declared that Ukraine has until November 27th to accept the U.S.-backed peace framework. This plan, referred to as the 28-point peace plan, is framed as a comprehensive approach to resolving the ongoing Russia-Ukraine conflict. Trump has characterized the plan as non-negotiable, presenting it as a take-it-or-leave-it proposal. The framing here is critical because it signals both urgency and leverage. The United States is attempting to assert influence over the negotiation process, positioning itself as the primary arbiter of the outcome. Zelensky's response has been cautious. Ukraine has signaled its intention to propose alternative solutions rather than accept the plan outright. This reflects the challenges Kyiv faces in balancing domestic political considerations, the expectations of its citizenry, and the strategic support of its international partners. By setting a firm deadline, Trump is placing Ukraine in a high-pressure situation, emphasizing the importance of timely decisions and signaling that delays could carry consequences for U.S. support. It is also important to understand the domestic U.S. context. Trump's announcement can be viewed through multiple lenses. As a diplomatic initiative, a political statement aimed at consolidating influence among Republican voices, or a broader effort to shape historical narratives regarding U.S. involvement in the conflict. The deadline, while ostensibly aimed at facilitating negotiations, is also a powerful tool for signaling U.S. priorities and setting expectations for both Ukraine and Russia. From a strategic perspective, deadlines in international diplomacy can serve as catalysts for decision-making. They create pressure, reduce indecision, and can prompt negotiations that might otherwise stall. However, deadlines can also backfire if perceived as coercive or unrealistic, potentially hardening positions or provoking resistance. Ukraine's approach to this deadline will be closely monitored by allies, adversaries, and global observers, making this announcement a pivotal moment in the conflict's trajectory. Next, let's break down the key provisions of the plan itself. According to reports, the 28-point peace plan includes several major elements designed to reshape the security and military landscape in Eastern Europe. First, both Russia and Ukraine would be required to sign a legally binding non-aggression pact with Europe. This provision aims to formalize commitments that prevent future hostilities, creating a foundation for long-term stability in the region. Second, Ukraine is required to forego NATO membership, and NATO would agree not to station troops in Ukrainian territory. This is one of the more controversial elements, as it directly impacts Ukraine's sovereignty and long-term security strategy. NATO membership has been a central pillar of Ukraine's defense policy since 2014, and requiring Ukraine to abandon this goal represents a significant concession. European allies are closely watching this provision, as it affects the collective security framework of the continent. Third, the plan proposes limitations on Ukraine's military, capping its size at 600,000 troops. This measure is intended to reduce the perceived threat to Russia and to reassure Moscow that Ukraine will maintain a defensive posture rather than an offensive one. While such limitations may contribute to immediate conflict de-escalation, they also have implications for Ukraine's ability to maintain long-term security and autonomy. Finally, Russia would be required to legally codify non-aggression toward both Ukraine and European states. This includes formal treaties or agreements recognized under international law. By doing so, the plan seeks to create a legally enforceable framework, rather than relying solely on informal diplomatic assurances. Overall, the 28 points are ambitious and wide-ranging, aiming to create a comprehensive security, military, and political settlement. They attempt to balance the competing interests of Ukraine, Russia, the US, and European allies. However, the provisions raise questions about sovereignty, military readiness, and international law. For Ukraine, accepting these terms would require significant trade-offs. For Russia, codifying non-aggression could be viewed as a political victory if it prevents NATO expansion and limits Ukraine's military capacity. The next few days and weeks are crucial as stakeholders analyze these provisions and develop responses. Beyond security provisions, the 28-point plan also addresses the logistics of military withdrawal, ceasefire, and reconstruction. Ukrainian troops are expected to withdraw from certain areas of Donetsk and other contested territories. These zones would then be designated as neutral buffer regions, serving as a demilitarized area to reduce the likelihood of renewed hostilities. Once redeployment is complete, an immediate ceasefire is to be implemented. The speed and scope of this ceasefire are critical, as they determine whether hostilities can truly be paused or whether localized skirmishes will continue. Rapid cessation of violence is a necessary step to stabilize civilian populations and prevent further displacement. Additionally, the plan calls for Ukrainian elections to take place 100 days after the agreement is finalized. This timeline is significant because it ensures that political processes resume while still under a framework designed to maintain stability. The elections are likely to be closely monitored by international observers to ensure fairness and adherence to democratic principles. The plan also outlines joint management of gas infrastructure and reconstruction projects between the US and Ukraine. This includes key energy pipelines and facilities that are essential for Ukraine's economic recovery. Reconstruction efforts are to be funded in part by the allocation of $100 billion in frozen Russian assets, with the U.S. taking a 50% profit share. These provisions not only facilitate immediate economic recovery, but also embed U.S. interests in Ukraine's long-term infrastructure and energy security. The combination of military, political, and economic measures reflects a comprehensive approach to conflict resolution. However, implementation will be challenging. Logistics, security, political buy-in, and international coordination are all essential to success. Missteps in any of these areas could undermine the plan and reignite conflict. The plan also contains clauses with nuclear and economic implications, which are particularly sensitive. First, Russia and the United States agree to extend nuclear non-proliferation treaties, and Ukraine would formally become a nuclear-free state. This has long-term strategic consequences, as it ensures that Ukraine does not develop nuclear capabilities while maintaining commitments from Russia to respect non-aggression agreements. For Europe and NATO, this is a critical reassurance regarding the proliferation of nuclear weapons in a volatile region. Economically, the plan allocates $100 billion in frozen Russian assets to fund U.S.-led reconstruction in Ukraine. The U.S. is projected to receive a 50% share of profits from these investments. This creates both opportunity and controversy, as it ties U.S. economic interests directly to the reconstruction process. Questions about oversight, transparency, and the ethical dimensions of profit sharing in post-conflict recovery are likely to be debated extensively. Additionally, the plan envisions long-term U.S.-Russia cooperation in energy and rare earth mining. This is an ambitious element, as it seeks to create mutual economic incentives to maintain peace. By embedding cooperation in strategic sectors like energy and critical minerals, the plan aims to reduce the incentives for future conflict. However, the feasibility of such cooperation depends on political will, trust, and enforcement mechanisms, which are historically fragile in the context of Russia-U.S. relations. Taken together, these nuclear and economic clauses illustrate the high stakes of the 28-point plan. They extend beyond immediate military concerns to address the structural conditions necessary for long-term stability and prosperity. At the same time, they raise questions about fairness, enforcement, and international legal norms. The final slide addresses reactions from key stakeholders and the broader stakes of the plan. In Ukraine, President Zelensky is expected to submit alternative proposals. However, deviating from the Trump-backed plan risks losing critical U.S. support, which remains a cornerstone of Ukraine's defense and economic strategy. This balancing act is delicate, as Ukraine must negotiate between its sovereignty and the strategic leverage provided by its ally. In the U.S., reactions are divided along partisan lines. Some Republican voices, including Senator Roger Wicker, argue that the plan favors Moscow excessively and could undermine U.S. credibility. Others see it as a pragmatic approach to ending a prolonged conflict and reducing risks for American troops and economic interests. These internal debates highlight the domestic political dimension, which could influence the pace and tone of diplomatic efforts. European leaders emphasize that any agreement affecting NATO and EU responsibilities requires consent from member states. This is a reminder that U.S.-driven plans cannot unilaterally dictate the security arrangements for Europe. Coordination, communication, and consensus building will be essential to avoid undermining collective security commitments. From Russia's perspective, President Vladimir Putin has confirmed receipt of the plan and expressed willingness to discuss details fully. Moscow is likely to scrutinize the provisions carefully, weighing the strategic, economic, and military implications. Russia's response will shape the feasibility of implementation and may determine whether the plan can move forward or becomes a point of diplomatic tension. In summary, the 28-point peace plan represents a high-stakes diplomatic initiative with wide-ranging implications. It touches on military, political, economic, and nuclear issues, and requires careful negotiation among multiple actors. How Ukraine responds, how the U.S. frames its involvement, and how Europe and Russia react will determine whether this plan serves as a pathway to peace or a source of further tension. The next few weeks are critical, as the November 27th deadline approaches, and the international community watches closely for developments.